Welcome to the 40th NBER Macro Annual Conference. We're delighted that everybody could come. And I just wanted to make a few announcements before we go into the first paper. So first of all, I want to thank Rob Shannon, the NBER, for all of the logistics and helping us set this up. Second, I want to remind, Second, I wanted to remind everybody of the code of conduct. You probably heard it so many times that I don't need to read it again, but if you have any questions, please ask. Third, I'd like to introduce our rapporteurs, Aaron Gibson and Paola Donaldson, who are there, and they will be recording all of the general discussion. So during the general discussion, please state your name and then wait till you have a microphone next to you. Let's see. And then remember, it's going to be live streamed, and every presenter, both authors and discussants, need to share their screen if they have slides. And then finally, just a little note on the program. We had a paper that was withdrawn, but it allowed us to expand the panel on fertility and then have more reasonable breaks. So we encourage everybody to catch up with people during the longer breaks. So with that, we will start with our first paper, which is putting economics back into geoeconomics. And Matteo will present.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, John, for inviting us. So when they solicited this paper, what they asked us to do was to perform two tasks, really. First, introduce to economists a little bit more of the political science aspects of all this. There's a large literature away from economics on these topics. And second, to give almost like an overview of modeling tools that can be used to make this topic more formal. And so that's what we set out to do. And the paper is with Clayton, who's sitting over there, and Jesse Schreger at Columbia. Let's see, this works. Apparently not. Here we go. We're back. Okay, so first, what is the topic and what does geoeconomics mean? It's the idea that hegemonic countries like the US or China exert power by, let me see if I can make this disappear. What is it? My video. This one? I got it. Thank you. So it's the idea that these countries use existing finance and trade relationships to exert power abroad, either to achieve economic goals or political goals. And there's a whole bunch of questions that we're all interested in. I mean, this thing is becoming more interesting by the minute with what's going on in the world. So, you know, when we first titled our first paper 3 years ago, A Framework for Geoeconomics, there was a question whether people knew what geoeconomics was. And there was a question that I had to motivate it. Now there's a question of, please don't talk about Trump too much. There's other things to talk about. So the world has changed meaningfully since then. So this thing is really, okay. So give you some examples. You can see I put the Trump tariffs. They're there, okay? But there's a lot more. You know, this goes back centuries. Like the Medici made their bank central to all of, like, you know, Renaissance. Pulling a loan or extending a credit was a way to exert political, you know, and engineer political alliance. England did it. You know, Churchill moved the Royal Navy from being on coal to being on oil. And they were pretty scared because Britain was rich in coal. This was before the World War I. Britain was rich in coal, but not in oil. And so they made a massive investment in trying to secure oil around the world. That's how the Anglo-Persian oil companies started. China has been at this very prominently with the Belt and Road Initiative. And if you look through the history of the US, it's easy to forget how much economic statecraft this country has exerted over time. Some of it went well, some of it didn't. The Marshall Plan was a big part of it, but then we've also seen commercial imperialism with the CIA and United Fruit Company intervening in Latin America. We've seen the US exerting macroeconomic power, telling Britain that if they didn't withdraw the troops from Suez, they were going to not get any emergency assistance over a balance of payments crisis. We've certainly seen COCOM. Like when we think about the AI controls now, most economists, certainly those my age, think this is a new thing. But this was routine during the Cold War. There was a whole system of export controls trying to limit exports of technology to the Soviets. You know, the Trump tariffs. I don't know where they are right now, but as I speak, you can update me just in case they change. Now, I promised an introduction to political science, and I will do it two ways. First, it's kind of a pity that in economics, we've reduced the concept of power to really mean market power. Look, when we say that a country is powerful or the JP Morgan is powerful, we don't mean markups. We mean something much broader. And I think there is certainly notions of that in the literature, but it's not the key. And in political science, instead, there are quite very intriguing notions of power. So one that goes all the way back to 57 is pretty straightforward. A has power over B to the extent that he can get B to do something that he would otherwise not do. And I'm going to use that extensively in the modeling today. But then there is other things that are pretty interesting. So you can see the relational power. It's pretty similar to the first definition. Is I'm exerting influence over another actor. But then, Strange had a pretty interesting idea of like structural power. What if I'm exerting power over many people, but part of what I'm doing is I'm changing the aggregates? I'm either setting up the rules of the game, like in an international organization sense, or in a macro sense, I might be moving prices, externalities, and aggregate quantities. Each player takes them as given, but that's really where I'm exerting my power. I'm manipulating a whole equilibrium. These notions are very interesting. Unfortunately, they're also a little fuzzy. And the political scientists recognize this themselves. They've been hard to operationalize, either from a theory perspective of what exactly do we mean. And because of that, I will argue also bring them to the data or do policy counterfactuals are very hard to do if you leave so much of the story unspecified. Now, in economics, I will try to remind you that there is a largely forgotten and I would say unjustly forgotten history of this topic. In particular, Hirschman, as an economist, later he became a much broader social science. But this was him as a young kid emerging from World War II. He comes to the US at Berkeley and he writes a book on trade, thinking about this topic. And his views are, aligned with Adam Smith in dismissing the mercantilism, the simple idea that we're bargaining over a fixed set of resources. This is a zero-sum game. I have power over you, therefore you don't have it over me. And thinking instead much more in the Wiener vibe of the world of plenty and power, and thinking about how does these two relate. So what he dismisses is the notion that we're guaranteed that if we do laissez-faire trade, we can stop thinking about power, that none of these issues will ever come up, or that that's optimal. So it's somewhere in the middle. And I strongly, for those of you that haven't read the book, which I assume is most, that certainly included me until recently, it's really a remarkable book. It provides a full theory of power based on trade imbalances. He also puts together an index to measure this, which we all know because it's the Hirschman-Herfindahl index. And if you look at the impact of this, just because you don't have to trust me, you like data, I pulled all Google Scholar citations of this book. First of all, there are not that many. There's only about 3,500, 3,800. But if you look at where they come from, you can see that they start in economics and then they plummet. And by the mid-1970s, this becomes a foundational book for a field called IPE. You don't have to trust me because Jeff is one of the most senior people in that field, and he'll talk about it. And so we kind of largely forgot about this, and this has been kept alive in a different part of the social sciences, and I think we should go back to it. So if our research agenda is somewhat successful, 10 years from now, that red line is going to start going up again. We'll see. Now, let me get to how we think about this. So the second part is, if you never thought about this, how do you think about it? Now, we have very formal papers. Here, I'm going to do it very informal and high level and give you the main ideas. So a crucial one is thinking of power as a participation constraint. I am trying to get Olivier to do something for me. I'm going to, alone, he has his own equilibrium. You can see it here. There are some set of aggregates, and he chooses these private choices X that are optimal for him. That's where he stands. I can approach him and threaten him. I can say, let's put a lot of tariffs on whatever Olivier, for example, sells to me. So part of the handbook chapter that we put together, or the macro annual, is showing how you can model many tariffs that are going to, many threats that are going to take this form. Now, he's still going to react optimally. He will choose a different set of private choices given that threat. I could also promise him something. I could say, look, if you do this for me, I'm going to give you foreign aid, for example. Or I'm going to solve some other problem for you. I'm going to make you part of an alliance. The gap between these two options is going to be pretty important. Why? Because ultimately, I'm going to take the Dals formulation. that what me having power over Olivier means is that I'm going to ask him to take a set of costly actions, things that from a private perspective he wouldn't have wanted to do, that I desire. And if you're a macro theorist, I'm going to do it by doing wedges in its first order conditions. Why? Because we've learned over 20 years of macro theory how flexible those are to incarnate things like trade policy, macroprudential, or tariffs. Ultimately, he's going to decide to comply with what I'm asking if it's better off than the outside option. Okay? And this doesn't have to be deterministic. This could be stochastic. We could play a game where, maybe I screw it up, I ask too much, and he refuses. But here I'm going to take it to be deterministic. So power here is going to have a very easy connotation. Micropower, which we defined in an earlier paper, it's simply the gap, the biggest gap that I can create between what I can threaten him with and what I can reward him with. That's the maximal amount of cost of his private choices that he's going to be willing to take before he tells me that he walks away. But that's taking as given all of the aggregates. Now, of course, if I'm the US, I'm not going to bargain with Oliver alone. I'm going to bargain with all of you. And when I ask you to do something, I'm going to think about how that changes the equilibrium. How, for example, that changes the coordination game. Are we all on the dollar? The dollar is just one of these Z. It's a strategic complementarity. Again, if you're a macro theorist, you've seen this a million times, okay? We've used it very frequently in the field. So I might ask each one of you to come into my network. Each one of you accepts because it's focusing only on the private cost of being on my network. But I'm doing it because I'm building what I'm going to call macro power. I'm manipulating the overall general equilibrium in my favor. And that's changing not only how much I can extract directly from you, but literally how much power I have over you. So I'm going to use this to build power over an entire equilibrium. Okay? This is going to be a concept that we will find very useful. Now, these thetas look like something very generic. What can I threaten you with? If you look through the history, there is a whole host of possible things that I can use. Import and export taxes are in the news these days. I could do export controls, but I could do financial sanctions. I could tell the Russians that they cannot have access to the reserves that they thought they had. I could do trade credit. I could disconnect you from SWIFT. There's also a bunch of tools that I can use. For example, I might tell a European company that they cannot sell a lithography machine to China. That's going to be my ask out of ASML if I'm the US government. And the reason I'm doing it is a form of industrial policy. I would like China not to be able to use that machine for manufacturing. Or I can do macro restrictions. I mentioned the Suez Canal crisis. That's a typical example of a macro restriction. The macro annual was set up to take all of this and sort of sketch out, almost like a sketchbook, how you turn them into one of those status. Like, what are the micro foundations? So I'm going to give you just two because it's fun and it makes it concrete. I'm going to think of a small open economy, somebody with locked preferences, a very simple budget constraint. They have a final good that they consume that is produced domestically, and their income is an endowment of an intermediate good that they have, and the profits of the final producer in the country. Okay, so it's a very simple economy, and the production function is CS. So this producer is using inputs from all over the world, including his own. Now let's think of super simple threats. One is the threats not to sell. So the hegemon tells this country, do what I say, or I'm not going to provide you some of the inputs that you want. You're going to have to produce with a subset of inputs that I control either directly or through somebody else in my network. Typical example is, I don't give you some semiconductors. If you work out the math, it's not that surprising. How much power do I have over you from a micro perspective is the loss that I can induce with the threat. What does it look like? It looks like what you would expect from trade theory. It depends a lot on the elasticity of substitution. I have no power over you if the things that I control have very easy substitutes somewhere else, okay? The second thing that it depends on very non-linearly is omega. The fraction of expenditures that you would have made on me as a hegemon if things were undisturbed. If I control all the market, if omega is very close to 1, I cornered you. So you can see that this formula, which I just plotted, is familiar to every trade theorist. This is what the ACR formula looks like. And it's very nonlinear. So these days, there's lots of talk about choke points. What is a choke point? It's nothing else than a sector where I control almost all of it. It's extremely difficult to substitute away from it. And if we're talking about a more complicated production function, it probably enters Leontief in the production function. Like, that's a very simple economic sort of theory of what a choke point is. Now you can flip this and say, well, let's think of other threats. What if I say that I'm not going to buy from you? What if the hegemon says, if you don't do what I say, I will impose extremely high tariffs on any imports in my country from you? That's the Trump administration against Colombia, for example. Country, not university. I just keep going. So what is the threat here? Chi is a price discount, is how much do I make the price of your export fall in response to my tariff? What does it look like? It looks pretty similar. It's a form of Lerner symmetry. You can see that here the threat is effective. Why? Because it's starving the country of revenue on exports. Why is that revenue useful? Well, it's only useful because you're going to use it to buy intermediate inputs on the imports. So it's, what we're trying to do with Russia, starving them of oil revenues. We don't like them having oil revenues because they can use them to buy imports. That's essentially what's happening. It's non-linear in a similar way. Now, rather than doing the whole sort of shebang of every possible threat and how you do it, that one you can, do it at night by reading our paper. I want to think about one more thing and then move to the optimal policy. So the one more thing is, these threats are very blunt. They're simply threats to the outside option. But if you think hard about the economics, there are better things to do. In particular, there are threats to the inside option. Suppose that, for example, John has a commitment issue. We would like to build a mine in Africa. The mine is going to get expropriated the moment we build it. But if I can threaten you, for example, with suspending aid, manufacturing, finance altogether, that threat might be a good enforcement for the mine. Now, this is not moving the outside option. This is moving his inside option. Because thanks to the threat, the business is going to go through. So this echoes the view in political science of hegemons, essentially global policemen or global enforcement. And again, if you're a theorist, this is nothing else than sort of joint threat from microtheory. The more you can use many, many sectors and coordinate them into a threat, the more you slacken incentive constraints, the more activity takes place. So there's plenty of that in the chapter. Now, let me finish quickly and go to the data. So first, I'm not going to talk today about any of our papers. Based on all this, there's a question of what is optimal policy? What do I ask Olivier to do? And also, Olivier understands that I'm going to bully him. So how does he react? And two things that I want to highlight, just because I think they're really important for the world right now. Thinking about the ex-ante reaction is super critical. If I bully him too much, he's going to want to move away from me. As he moves away from me, my own power gets dissipated by his own actions. I might want to have commitments that tell him, do business with me. I'm not going to bully you like crazy later. I'm only going to bully you a little bit. I do need to make some revenue from this, but reasonable. And a lot of the liberal world order is an expression of that. Is we have the IMF, we have these multilateral institutions, not because of some globalist planner. They're the incarnation of a hegemon that says, come and participate in my network. There are rules. It's not quite the jungle. You're gonna retain some surplus. We derive those things that they require a lot more structure in formal papers. Now, measurement. So as I said, to me, where economists have something to add is not only making things more formal and precise, but in doing so, being able to bring them to the data, figure out what's big, what's small, which threats are useless, but also figure out policy counterfactual. And I'm going to illustrate very quickly two approaches. One that comes from trade. You can take the formulas I just did, make them nested CS all you like, and use sufficient statistics approaches, which are very similar to the cost of autarky. This is not quite the cost of autarky. This is the cost of losing a subset of the inputs that might be scattered all over your production function. But it's not that surprising that the same formulas kick in. You need to observe expenditure shares, how much of these things do you control, and an object that we don't like because it's difficult to observe, which is the elasticity of substitution. But we now reduce this beast of a problem of geoeconomics and political economy to things that at least we can reasonably agree or disagree about, and we can try to measure. So if you take it to the data, for example, we estimate that for China, almost all of the power comes from threats not to sell manufacturing. If you look at the US, the vast majority comes from the financial sector. Why? Because the financial sector is essentially a choke point. is the one thing that the US controls that has the following characteristics. It's almost entirely controlled by the US. It's very difficult to substitute away from things like SWIFT or the custodial system. And it's very important indirectly into production. You can make an economy crater if you make the financial system collapse, which we've all learned during the financial crisis. Now, last bit, because it's fun, I want to talk about a newest paper that doesn't exist yet. Threats are difficult to observe. In particular, well, Trump is making it somewhat easy because you just have to go on Twitter. But previous administration, a lot of the most powerful threats might be behind closed doors. And in particular, they not get realized because the target complies. For example, the US has allegedly routinely threatened European banks for doing trade financing with Iran. Any European bank that knows the threat is going to comply and stop doing it, and you don't see it. But one thing that you can do is you can rely on text. Every analyst report in Europe that day is going to say that bank has stopped dealing with Iran because the State Department was pressuring them. The CEOs themselves very often say, we're shutting down this program or this relationship in response to this pressure. So what you can do is you can leverage large language models, which we've been doing for the last few years, and go through massive amounts of this. Like think of like news, all analyst reports, all of the CEOs' transcripts. And I couldn't resist updating it to yesterday. You can think of this as how many of these things talk about various issues. You can see the tariffs go up in the first Trump administration. You can then see the sanctions on Russia and export controls. And then you can see a little spike that is happening right now with uncertainty about tariffs. You can debate, you can divide them in, are you actually subject to tariff now? Or are you worried about tariffs in the future? Or you can ask them, how are you reacting? And this is kind of fascinating. This is not hard data. This is pure text. I'm not measuring this with what they actually do. It's just what they report doing. And you can see that if you look at quantities, if you look at sort of getting out of a market exit, it's there in the middle. Tariffs don't do it, but export controls and sanctions do it because we express most often them in quantities. You cannot sell to Russia. If you look at pricing, it's the other way around. Tariffs are a price mechanism. They all respond by adjusting prices, but not quantities as much. And similarly, you can see supply chain adjustments are going through the roof. So these we're going to keep doing in almost real time. Let me conclude, which I just cannot think of anything else to do. This goes back to the Lucas, once you think of growth. Once you think of this topic, I can't think of anything else. There is nothing that I can think of economists doing right now other than trying to figure this out. And there's a lot to do. Let me mention three. There's a lot more modeling, not just of what I did today, but even of our full papers. There's a lot of need for data. You want to know in this world who's connected to whom, why, how easy to substitute. That data collection is going on. It's still in its infancy. And similarly, we need quantitative models. We need something that says ultimately what's big and what's small. If we're going to get these tariffs, how big is the reaction? Again, there's a lot of things out there. I would say that we're still at 10% of where we would like to be. Thank you.